You know, we're kind of like the original Odd Couple. You're the messy one, and I'm...
Shut up!
Comedy often stems from contrast, so it's no surprise that taking two polar opposite characters and forcing them to live together became such a reliable sitcom trope. But given The Odd Couple started over 50 years ago, the more this trope is used, the more tired and predictable the entire genre becomes. An artificial set, a laugh track, and two characters that can never quite see eye to eye. Something needed to change. Enter Peep Show, created by Jesse Armstrong and Sam Bain and starring David Mitchell and Robert Webb, which takes the generic premise of two polar opposite characters living in an enclosed space and adds the genius element of being able to hear both characters' inner monologue as they engage with each other and the world around them. This way, the viewer doesn't just get a superficial view of each character and the role they play in the show, but instead experiences what it's like to be them as each disaster unfolds due to their competing interests and social awkwardness. Unsurprisingly, the show is now attempting to be rebooted in America for the 5th time, with all the previous attempts falling flat, most notably the 2005 version starring Johnny Galecki, which felt like it just flimsily sellotaped together some elements of the UK version, but clearly lacked the dark comedic bite to make the show work. Peep Show could never just be another polished American sitcom. It requires absolute commitment from the writers to express the lead character's most unsanitary thoughts and absolute chemistry between the two actors, which is near impossible to replicate given Mitchell and Webb were already a comedy duo before being cast in the show and turned out to be generational talents in their own right. Peep Show is considered a cult classic in the UK, as while it did maintain a loyal viewership, it was far too dark to ever achieve broader mainstream success, meaning most people outside of the UK won't have seen it or maybe even heard of it. So if you're one of those people, consider this my full endorsement and recommendation, especially from the second season onwards. This show is worthy of your time. But after a 9-season run, what is it about Channel 4's Peep Show that makes it stand out as one of the best sitcoms ever made, despite technically being just another Odd Couple comedy? The first key is the show's unique visual style. Given they were originally going to name the show POV, short for point of view, it's no surprise that the entire series is consistently filmed from that angle. The visual style of any sitcom may seem secondary to the writing, but whatever way you choose to shoot the show is going to automatically enable and disable certain comedic opportunities. For example, a mockumentary style allows for funny reaction shots and contrasting retrospective interviews, while the traditional multi-camera style allows the actors to move around as they play off one another, and use the entire breadth of the stage to time fun comedic reveals. But in both styles, the camera, the perspective of the show, is observational, a third party that's capturing each moment. Whereas in Peep Show, it's all shot in the first person. You're seeing what the character sees, even if sometimes it's not aesthetically pleasing or particularly clarifying. This shuts down certain possibilities. For example, the show can't orchestrate the large visual punchlines that other sitcoms rely on. But by sidestepping the traditional style, it enables the show to achieve the gritty realism of everyday life. Mark and Jeremy don't live in a fictitiously spacious apartment that allows for a wide variety of moments. They live in a cramped 2-bedroom flat that's quite claustrophobic, which feeds into the feeling that they're always treading in each other's personal space. And by shooting it this way, as opposed to in the third person, now the narrated inner monologues can feel much more natural. As if we're already physically in the character's head, then why wouldn't we be listening to their thoughts as if they were our own? And that leads into the second key, which is the main vehicle for the show's comedic edge, the inner monologue.
God help you if you use voiceover in your work, my friends. God help you. It's flaccid, sloppy writing.
Some writers view using voiceover as a cheap narrative tool, as a golden rule of screenwriting is show don't tell. But Peep Show proves that if you're brave enough to use narration correctly, it can actually enhance the experience for the viewer. As we're no longer bound by just what the characters say to one another, now we get a direct line into their true feelings and ulterior motivations. For example, when Mark and Jez disagree with one another, there's a sharp contrast between what they're willing to say publicly and what they automatically think privately.
Have a good one.
You too, mate.
Bye, mate.
Work-shy freeloader.
Tight-fisted muncher.
There's so much more going on in social interactions than just what's being said. Each character has their own ego to overcome, as well as social obligations to sustain. So hearing the inner monologue adds a whole other dimension to each scene that would otherwise be lost. For example, when Jez is depressed after his uncle dies, Sophie suggests that he shouldn't be left alone and tells Mark to invite him on their romantic weekend away together. Now, neither Mark nor Jeremy actually want him to go, but due to politeness end up trying to do right by the other person, and therefore neither of them get what they want.
God, he really, really wants me to come.
It'll just be such a laugh. Please say no, please say no.
Well, alright.
Throughout the series, so much of the characters' behaviour is driven by social obligation. Their need to not be seen to disappoint others causes them to go along with things that make them personally miserable, until they end up secretly doing what they always wanted to anyway, and inevitably get caught and have to either lie to avoid punishment, or watch the whole thing blow up in their face in the worst way imaginable. But the inner monologue only works if it stays true to reality. No one wants to hear the insights of a polished, politically correct narrator. They want an unfiltered, self-centered misanthrope whose judgment is largely clouded by their own ego. And that's one thing that Peep Show gets absolutely right. Both characters' inner monologues are unflinchingly egotistical. Despite being personally miserable, Mark still believes he's right about everything, and the world would be a better place if everyone did things his way.
I was right about North Korea, I was right about the European Constitution, and by God, I think I'm right about the congestion charge.
And Jez believes he's better than everyone in every room he walks into, as in his imagination he's a creative genius, despite never actually achieving anything and usually being in just as dire a position as the people he's looking down on. And the humour then stems from this contrast between the characters' view of themselves and reality. Like when Jez blatantly bullshits his way through a job interview that he somehow believes he's nailing, until then the interviewer's point of view reveals the truth.
God, that sounded amazing. Okay. Don't accidentally get the bugger.
We're doing great.
The intrusive inner monologue is Peep Show's calling card, as it highlights how different our lived experience is to the role we're playing in any given scene. If you removed it and shot each scene from a traditional perspective, some moments would still be funny, but it would be missing that third dimension that really attaches us to the characters. As despite how embarrassing and bitter they are in their own heads, a lot of their selfish thought patterns are shamefully relatable. The next key is allowing the story to always come from the character. Like most British sitcoms, Armstrong and Bain love to torture their protagonists. Mark and Jez's circumstances tend to only ever go from bad to worse over the course of an episode. If a character does finally get what they want, then they will soon discover it was never what they really wanted in the first place, and now have to unceremoniously find a way out of that situation or go through with it as a form of punishment. But it's the step-by-step progression of each storyline that's so funny to observe, as there's rarely ever a plot or oppressive antagonist forcing them into this position. Both Mark and Jez are living in a hell of their own creation, driven by their own base needs for sex, money, or social acceptance. Most of their storylines spiral out of control due to their own personality flaws guiding them down a completely avoidable path to a brutally humiliating conclusion. For example, one of my favourite longer-running storylines starts when Jeremy goes to therapy in Season 8. Now, attending therapy could normally be a constructive moment in anyone's life, as it's showing they're ready to confront their demons and make serious changes. But for Jez, he manages to turn this potentially healthy decision into yet another destructive spiral due to his inherent laziness, lack of impulse control, and affinity for shortcuts. So just notice how these character traits guide each amusing step of the story until we hit the biggest punchline. Mark wants Jez to move out, so he offers to pay for a package of therapy sessions to help him move on to the next chapter of his life. So step 1, Jez goes to the therapy session and, like a child, gets scared and runs away before it even starts, and then lies to Mark about where he's been. Step 2, when he finally does attend, he has an immediate breakthrough in just one session and realizes that he's not currently a successful musician and needs to find a new path in life. Step 3. So what does he choose? Becoming a therapist, of course, as that's what most recently made him feel good. But becoming a trained psychotherapist requires years of education. He wants results now, so he'll just become a life coach instead. Step 4. He attends the life coaching class and reverts back to feeling as if he's better than everyone in the room, despite having not read the only email he needed to read to prepare for the class. Step 5. He sleeps with the teacher and accidentally says something during dirty talk that turns her off so much that she refuses to give him the certificate for finishing the course. So Mark prints him out a fake certificate, which Jez finds genuinely validating enough to now start working as a life coach. Step 6. He takes on 2 clients, instantly ruining one of their lives by spreading all of his personal secrets as if it's hot gossip. And finally, Step 7. Now that he's essentially homeless, he has to ask to sleep on the floor of his one remaining client, leading him to the hilarious realization of how absurd this looks.
Who's that in the corner, Andy? Oh, that's my life coach. That shivering, pale man with the suitcase of porn is helping me get my life back on track.
This is just superb writing. The idea of a life coach failing at life to the point they have no other job they could do other than being a life coach is amusing enough. But for that to lead to him being homeless on his own client's floor is too perfect. And every step of the storytelling process is completely authentic to his character. He makes no sacrifices, takes every shortcut he possibly could, and just does whatever will make him feel good in the moment along the way. Until by the end of what was meant to be a new constructive life path, he's in a worse position than when he started, and is forced to sleep in a bin bag in the corner of the room like human waste. And that leads into the final key, the duality of man. Part of what I love about Peep Show is that it doesn't pick a side. We have 2 characters that embody very different belief systems, perspectives, and ways of life. One acts 30 years older than he actually is, and the other seems like a teenager trapped in a permanent state of arrested development. Now, in the modern media landscape, it's easy to imagine a premise like this becoming overly politicized, as technically we have one character that's a straight-laced conservative and one character that's a libertine progressive. But the writers never get sidetracked with a political message or trying to hammer home that either character is better. They're both equally dreadful in different ways and both oddly enlightening in different ways. Mark is a tragic cynic that thinks everyone just needs to joylessly put their head down and grind out their entire life, and Jez is a tragic, unproductive optimist that burns through his entire nest egg without planning for the future. Their personalities are succinctly summed up when they get lost in the Quantox, and Mark reveals his secret chocolate bar that he believes they need to ration in order to survive. But while Mark wants to refrain for today to plan for tomorrow, Jez wants all of his portion now, and devours it in a single mouthful before turning around and asking for more.
Now, just don't come to me asking for some more when you didn't have the foresight to...
Can I have a bit more?
No.
Oh, come on, just a bit.
But despite their stark differences, both characters remain trapped in this codependent relationship where they can never truly grow. Jez needs Mark to house him and essentially parent him, which Mark secretly loves as he's a control freak, and Mark needs Jez to make him appear socially acceptable enough to date and have someone around that he can look down on. Apart, they're nothing, but combined they just about qualify as one functioning adult. If you can handle dark comedy, Peep Show is easily one of the best sitcoms ever made. It's an endlessly quotable, twisted series that takes you on a cynical journey into the darker recesses of the human mind. Similar to Jesse Armstrong's other work, the main characters are despicably selfish, but there's a relatable childishness to their self-destructive behavior that you can't help but empathize with. As by physically putting us in their heads and hearing their most private thoughts, we're granted a level of intimacy that no other sitcom could ever compete with. We don't have to wonder what it might be like to be Mark or Jez, as for 54 hilarious episodes, in some way, we were. Now, if you made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching, but I need you to give the video a like. Perhaps even drop a comment, depending on your mood, and definitely subscribe, so the algorithm will do its thing.